Welcome to another episode of the Mixed Signals podcast from Semaphore, where we are talking to all of the people shaping our new media age. I'm Max Tawney, media editor here at Semaphore, and with me, as always, on the other side of our office is Semaphore's editor-in-chief, Ben Smith. Hey, Ben.
Nice to see you, Max.
This week on the show, we're excited to have on Jonah Weiner. He's the co-author of Blackbird Spyplane, the popular newsletter for fashion, culture, and Unbeatable recon. He was one of the early adopters of Substack and key media figures in this new, fragmented media landscape. And we'll ask him about how Blackbird Spyplane has changed over the last 5 years, how he feels about mixing fashion media and e-commerce, and what Barack Obama's dad genes can teach us about the cyclical nature of fashion.
And as you'll imagine, this episode is like a real Max Tawney passion project here.
You know, Ben, don't sell yourself short. I mean, you know, you keep up with this stuff as well.
I think I'm wearing the same shirt I wore yesterday, Max, but I am super interested in what Jonah's built.
We'll dig into all of that right after the break. So, Ben, I think it's not going out on a limb too much to say that you probably consume more media than the average person, including more independent media. What Substacks do you subscribe to? How much are you paying every month for independent media?
Hundreds of dollars, I would say.
Hundreds of dollars.
Yes.
I'm also at this point paying hundreds of dollars, which is actually legitimately insane. But you know, the first independent Substack that I think I ever paid for was during the pandemic. I'm sitting around alone in my pajamas. I've got literally nothing to do except read and cook and I guess do my job, but kind of mostly just freak out on my couch. You know, during that time, I stumbled on Blackbird Spyplane. It was this cool, new, and interesting newsletter about fashion. Do you remember? You know Blackbird Spyplane, Ben. You're not totally washed.
I'm pretty washed, but because I was the Times media column and people were sending me tips about what the hot new things were, there were these like new newsletters. Another was by a woman named Rachel Tashjian, who then went, sold out and went into mainstream media. But they were, and I remember the phrase being animal style, in that they weren't really over-designed. They were kind of plain text and boldface and kind of deliberately kind of old-fashioned in a certain way and direct and with none of the artifice and sense of a sort of algorithmic soup of the social media of that moment in particular.
Yeah, and Blackbird Spyplane, of course, for our listeners who don't know, who have not been in the parlance of Spyplane put on to this shit yet, is a fashion and culture newsletter, which is just kind of a mix of interviews with celebrities and designers, some essays about fashion and kind of consumption, as well as recommendations for cool stuff from small, producers. The reason why I was interested in having Jonah here today, and why I think, Ben, you share my interest here, is that they've been doing this for 5 years. They've been incredibly successful since almost day one. But they're in kind of a more mature phase of independent media than a lot of stuff that's out there right now. And I think that Blackbird Spyplane has really evolved in some ways and is in kind of a different mindset and zone than some of the other places in independent media. It really has matured in some ways. Do you think that that's true?
Yeah, or at least I think it's kind of deepened its lane. And I think there's something about the fact that Jonah Weiner, the founder, who writes it with his wife, Erin Wiley, came out of really classic magazine journalism. You've probably read his profiles in the New York Times Magazine of Jerry Seinfeld or Billie Eilish, but a sort of maybe like the last of the classic magazine writer who is cares a lot about words, cares a lot about kind of getting it right, cares a lot about a kind of old-fashioned craftsmanship in media that I think is mostly out of fashion these days, but really is working for them.
Yeah, and I think it'll be really interesting to talk to him and ask him about the arc of independent media and kind of where it goes from here. Does it become more like legacy media, or does he try to kind of stay small and lean and just and keep doing what he's been doing so far? But actually, we're already late, and Jonah's waiting for us. So why don't we bring him on? So Jonah, thanks so much for doing this.
Great to be here.
You're still kind of a semi-celebrity, at least in my world. Everybody I know who I've told about this interview is very excited about it. But obviously, I don't know if like my parents or other people who listen to the show, maybe some older people who are less plugged in know what Blackbird Spyplane is. So how do you describe Blackbird Spyplane to people who don't know what it is?
Yeah. Let's see. I should have like a quick 25 words or less boilerplate at the ready. I'm not sure if I do, but the Style and Culture newsletter that I started with my wife, Erin, in 2020 at our kitchen table during pandemic lockdowns. And yeah, we sort of call it a newsletter about style and culture. It has a focus on clothes and the people who make them, but we do interviews not only with clothing designers, but with kind of people across the arts whose work we admire, about their work, how they do it, and also their relationship to sort of cherished things they own. And I guess sort of the through line is an emphasis on, I don't know, sort of the talismanic importance that we can put on, sort of clothes or curios, sort of physical objects that are sort of, I guess, distinguished by some kind of rarity or craft. So we're writing about a lot of small makers as opposed to really big lines. So it's sort of more about the relationship between people and the kind of things that we come to cherish and maybe see parts of ourselves reflected in, or aspects of our biography kind of come to reside in, versus a kind of shopping newsletter, although we do also link to things that we find that we think are cool.
And how big is it at this point? How many subscribers do you have?
We go Mystique mode since day one and don't share that. But if you look at the Substack, we're hosted on Substack. And if you look at the kind of rankings for fashion newsletters, we are number 2 out of however many.
Why the mystique? Is it just is it like just in keeping with the theme, the literal Blackbird Spyplane theme, or what's the desire to kind of keep that private?
I feel like the answer the question contains its answer. Mystique. Why mystique? I mean, there's a shortage of mystique in the world these days.
That is true. I mean, people love to come on the show and brag about the size of their audiences and how much money they make and stuff like that.
I heard the Scott Galloway episode. I know you're.
Yeah, although Scott was a little bit less, he didn't share as much as Kara Swisher, who just came out and told us how much she made.
Which I guess you're not going to do for mystique reasons. Although I love that the only people Max can think of who don't read Blackbird Spyplane are his parents. I think I got turned on to, I was a Times media columnist at the time, and somebody was like, here is this hot new thing in 2020 when you were just launching. And I wonder how it's changed and evolved since then.
Yeah, I mean, it has definitely changed it sort of necessarily has. And we're doing, I'm writing 2 of them a week. And a couple of years ago, Erin launched a kind of quote unquote women's vertical, which we find a lot of the dudes who subscribe read as well. But she's doing those at least twice a month. So you're doing so much that it's almost kind of like you look at yourself in the mirror every day, and it's not until you see a photo of yourself from 5 years ago that you see how much more gray is in your beard. It's kind of looking back at the first couple of years, I go, wow, that sort of in dribs and drabs or incrementally has really changed from where it started. I mean, the big thing would be that there was a voice that I write the newsletter in. Sorry, there is a voice that I write the newsletter in that was much more, let's say, densely stylized in the first couple of years for a few reasons. It is sort of very slang heavy, even the way that it was sort of just stylized in terms of sort of all caps words, bolding chunks of text. That was useful to me because before launching this newsletter, I've been a magazine journalist, since right out of college 20 years ago, and writing, I'm a contributing writer still at the New York Times Magazine. And so sort of one of the functions of that voice was to sort of tell my brain, I'm sort of switching gears. This is not a New York Times Magazine feature I'm writing now. And to sort of keep it bloggy, keep it loose, keep it fun for myself. I mean, I grew up in New York, sort of using a lot of, you can hear I don't talk the way I wrote the newsletter early on, but except after a few drinks. It's just since we're doing this in the morning. If this was nighttime, I'd sound even a little more spy-planey, but sort of using slang that I like using and sort of grew up using. Just was, a kind of signal to my brain, okay, this isn't the sort of New York Times Jonah, this is something else. And I think that it also performed the function, the way I said it for a while, was kind of people coming to the newsletter were going to be faced with, I don't know, this sort of slightly unhinged enthusiasm in the prose, and that was maybe going to be opaque and sort of repel 6 out of 10 people, but the 4 out of 10 who stick around are going to feel like they're kind of initiates and in on something. It sort of created a sort of in-group or in-joke dynamic that I liked. That said, that voice has been, just to answer Ben's question, toned down a lot.
That is something I noticed because I went back and I was reading some of the kind of top posts, even the ones from 2022. And it does seem that you kind of, scaled back a little bit of the voice, which I always loved. It cracked me up. I thought it was really fun. Just to give an example, and obviously these are meant to be consumed, read in a newsletter format, not spoken out loud necessarily, but I think this gives people a little bit of a slice. So in one of your older essays from 2022, you write, listen, Blackbird Spyplane is, quote, unbeatably prophetic and influential, so it's only a matter of time. Could be months, could be more, until the holy wisdom we are spitting today reaches corpo forces. Realizing that the neutered, rounded edge aesthetic is tired, these forces may very well pivot to some focus grouped, heavily diluted version of the Uggs principle. But we know that unbeatable real ones will always detect the Fugazi frequencies and go somewhere actually cool with beanbags and board games instead. I mean, was part of the reason that you decided to kind of like reel that back in, just you got a little bit bored? Was it constricting at some point, or was it like you wanted to welcome more people in and for it to be more accessible to different people?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. There wasn't really a sort of conscious dialing back. But, there were a couple of things. I did maybe 2 sort of important things along the way that related to this question were, one, doing this kind of very long, I don't remember how many words it was, maybe in the neighborhood of 4,000 words, so long for a newsletter, reported piece into this recently filed for bankruptcy e-commerce behemoth called SSENSE.
Yeah.
And I'd sort of heard from sort of small labels and small stores sort of a lot of ambivalence towards the role that SSENSE was playing in the kind of world of small clothes makers and small shops that we write about. Anyway, so I sort of did this long reported piece that was kind of not a million miles from something that I would have written for the Times Magazine. And I was kind of like, it doesn't make sense given the nature of what this sort of, investigative reported piece is, to have it also have this kind of like thick shellacking of kind of slang over it. So I really pulled it back. And then the other thing was I wrote a piece about pants for the New York Times Magazine that they wound up running on the cover. And so that even kind of, I don't know, maybe I had sort of built up a certain, I don't know, like a kind of divide in my own brain between the two sort of modes of writing that didn't need to be there. Maybe it had just served its purpose. Because writing about pants for the Times Magazine, I was like, I think a Spyplane reader could still dig this, but also like a proverbial like Max Tawny parent could also read it.
Speaking of that, in my kind of role as Max's parent, the
On
article was
my show dad.
The article was titled "Why Are Pants So Big Again?" Which honestly I think is a question many people have. What was like? Can you give us the distilled, not too slangy answer?
Pants, I think, are even if you don't know it, they're the most vexing garment you own. They kind of tend to occupy the most visual and material real estate of any outfit. They kind of move as you move, sort of more. Your torso, you're walking, your torso doesn't move the way pants do. They also sort of are loaded with so much cultural information about sort of who you are, what tribe you belong to, what sort of all kinds of cultural affiliations. There's so much densely packed into pants, semiotically speaking. In terms of why they got so big again, it's because they'd been skinny for far too long, and things kind of swung the other way. I found this great sort of diptych of images while I was working on it, which is sort of a picture of Obama, I think 2009, throwing out the pitch
At the White Sox game.
At a White Sox game. And this image that it's really funny to think about was sort of like widely mocked. Obama in dad jeans, sort of big stonewashed Levi's. And people were like, wow, we thought Obama was cool. We got to rethink this. What's up with these pants? That was the kind of contemporaneous reaction. Then you look at it from 2024, whenever I wrote that piece, those pants look cool. There's a photo of Obama these days wearing skinny, just sort of almost, khaki leggings. And it's like, oh, okay. So what registered as dad jeans in 2009 has totally flipped. I mean, with all kinds of trends, there's a pendulum that swings back and forth. And that finally happened with pants.
Incredible that Barack Obama is now the icon of like out of touch style.
Isn't it just that he represents like at both points, he's represented exactly kind of like the mainstream kind of like he's not really pushing the boundaries in either of those photos, right?
No, yeah, it was a great illustration of kind of like the state of the art of dad pants in the given year that those photos were taken.
That's so true. And that picture, that feature is really, really good for anybody who hasn't, any of our listeners who haven't read it. They should absolutely still go check it out. So one of the other things that I was kind of curious, and you got at this in one of your other answers, is, it strikes me that you've remained really independent throughout this process. You're not out here bragging about the size of your audience and doing these kind of like affiliate commerce things that a lot of other Substack newsletters are doing. What kind of opportunities have you gotten that you've turned down? Have people tried to buy you? Are they pitching a Spyplane podcast?
Yeah, well, I think sort of even before it comes to offers that we've turned down, I want to maybe even sort of like dwell for a second on, the setup there, which is, it's true. There's a lot of people who sort of buy, as a matter of course, especially people who are in the kind of broadly speaking recommendations business, are using affiliate links, which I imagine your audience doesn't need that explained. But essentially, if we link to a jacket on a certain site and you buy it, if we've used an affiliate link, we'll get a cut of that sale. We don't do that. A lot of newsletters do all over the place and rely on that as a big revenue stream. But I think one of the things that was really exciting to us about this moment of, I guess, crowdfunding writ large, Patreon ushers it in, Substack helps to consolidate it around newsletters, is that you really can do very well revenue-wise, depending on nothing but readers wanting to support the thing you do. And what's clarifying about that to me and Aaron is that it means that there's so much potential for conflicts of interest inherent in this business. It's really clarifying to know that the only people we owe anything are the people who pay for the newsletter. And so there's no ad relationships that we need to sort of manage, no advertisers, to put it more bluntly, whose stuff we need to cover. And in a similar sense, we're not incentivized by affiliate links to kind of just be shoveling a lot of, potential purchases down our readers' throats. So that's one of the first big kind of like, I don't know, ways that we say no to maybe what's become, people sort of shrug at it. They don't bat an eye. It's sort of become, in a lot of the case, kind of standard operating practice across media to A, run ads, and B, use affiliate links. And that originates, with both of us. If you're in the recommendation business and you use affiliate links or you run ads, on some level, no matter how cool you are, no matter how much I sort of like you and respect you, I trust you less, because there's a clear conflict there. And so we like removing that conflict from ourselves.
Although, it's funny. When you think about the fashion industry, it's like the least sort of obsessively ethical of the media industries. The standards at Vogue have always obviously been lower around this stuff than the standards at Vanity Fair and The New Yorker. And it's basically accepted that there are all these kind of overt and covert ways in which money and clothing and everything else moves around fashion. And even I think people who are very independent voices, Chris Black, who we had on before, who does How Long Gone, he's also a consultant to brands and talks about brands. It sounds like, you're a real outlier in this industry in your obsession with purity, aren't you?
It might be a function of the fact that I came to it after sort of 20 years doing magazine journalism. And actually, it's in my contract at the Times that, I sort of there are guidelines around sort of accepting gifts and things like that. So, I mean, even if it wasn't enshrined in a contract, it's just sort of my training, over 20 years, sort of like my role, sort of as relates to my writing is to, I guess, be pure in the way you're talking about.
Does the other stuff gross you out?
Yeah, it does. It does gross me out. I understand sort of, let's say, writ large, like sort of the individual decision to do it. I'm not going to get on anyone's case for it. It's hard to make a buck. I mean, something that one of the things that we do in the newsletter is sort of write about all kinds of sort of consumer pathologies, and also sort of, I guess it's not just consumer pathologies these days, but sort of all of us more and more feel like every time we open up our phones or open up an app, we are in the business of selling something to other people. I mean, sort of the phone is this sort of great way of reconfiguring all human relationships as transactional, whether it's I'm posting a photo of my vacation, to use that kind of example, and I want you to like it, I sort of want likes, or I'm running a drop shipping operation off TikTok and selling whatever trinket off my TikTok. So I am kind of grossed out by what can feel like the kind of commercialization of, all human relationships, for sure. And then also, I mean, again, I sort of think that readers are increasingly sort of savvy about this. And I don't know if they care about it in the sense that it's a deal breaker, but I think they sort of can detect the absence of a lot of, let's say, compromised behavior, in the sense that sort of I'll get an email from a publicist saying, hey, we'd love to give you, our client is releasing product X. We'd love to send some over. And we say, thanks so much, we don't accept gifts. Good to know that the thing is coming. And then I'll see a bunch of people on Instagram or on their various platforms talking about how good that thing is, or sharing that thing, or even more depressingly, just sort of showing the box of, let's say it's a pair of shoes, on their stories and saying thank you at the brand, and then immediately, I know, turning around to just sell it on eBay or sell it on Grailed. I mean, it's a kind of, I don't know, it's sort of a goofy economy. I understand why it's there, but it does feel good to sort of, I don't know, have no part in it.
Well, we have to take a short break, but we'll be right back with more from Jonah right after this.
This week on our branded segment from Think with Google, I spoke with Google's VP of Marketing, Josh Spanier, about how creators are rewriting the marketing playbook. Another listener question, Josh. Creator content is starting to rival traditional ad production. And I'm curious how top marketers are adapting to that shift.
So marketing has always been about trust. You trust a brand to work for you. That's why you'll pay a premium for it. Decades ago, people used television as a proxy for trust. They can afford TV, they must be a credible brand. What's been fascinating over the last 20 years with the emergence of YouTube is how the creator economy has really shifted trust from traditional ways of just buying ads to these creators who you build a relationship with and you trust. People trust your opinion, then your writing semaphore. That makes you a true creator. As a marketer, we really value creators who actually create meaningful stuff in the world, who have a real relationship with their audiences. We don't really like influencers who are inauthentic and fake and just traveling the world and pretending they have this amazing lifestyle. So wherever we can identify a creator, someone who's really doing something really interesting, that's what we want to tap into.
So if you're a brand, how do you tap into that?
That's such an important question, and it's easy to get this wrong. But the critical piece of all this is you have to work with a creator authentically. They know their audience. They've built up their audience from scratch. We've worked with a woman called Hope Allen. She has 7 million followers on YouTube. If we tell her what to say, if we put words in her mouth, it's just not going to work. We all can spot and see someone who is not authentically praising or using a product. So the critical piece is to let go of some of the control that we as marketers have and actually allow the creators to speak in their authentic voice, authentically about your product. When we do that, when we see that across brands and ourselves in Google Marketing, we see much higher success for our marketing efforts in partnership with these creators.
So it's more about kind of buying into the creator's world than just buying an ad?
100%. You need to show up authentically, and those creators need to believe in the product you have and what you're doing.
Where can people learn more about this?
Head on over to thinkwithgoogle.com. There's a new interview with Hope Allen about her wish list and how to work with her and how you can translate those learnings into working with any brand on YouTube with any creator.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Ben.
You're obviously like a word guy, magazine writer. There are very few of those left. And as you were sort of talking about, you think a lot about style in text. And we're moving into a world where video and audio seem to be swallowing a lot of what used to be text-based journalism. I mean, there's, people talking about a sort of a post-literate society and sometimes, doing these podcasts, which is, this is a kind of conversation that maybe used to be an interview where I'd sit down with you and then write up our conversation. And now we're just going to put this out as video. I'm curious how you're thinking about that. I see you do some video interviews, but do you imagine that there's going to be a place for this kind of text forever, or is this, are you going to be, moving into TikTok full time soon?
Yeah, well, I mean, I won't be. My hope there is that sort of, if that change finally happens, which I'm not sure it will. It's an interesting question. My crystal ball is foggy. My crystal ball is actually never good, except for when it comes to predicting what color is going to be really cool, or what pair of shoes. The crystal ball works okay in the newsletter every now and then, but as far as sort of like the future of media or the future of literacy, I sort of hope that if what you're describing does come to pass, that it'll be someone else's problem and not mine anymore. I think that I can kind of get a few more years out of writing. I mean, that's it. It's funny, sort of two things. One would be sort of whenever we do publish interviews, I often conduct the interviews in the newsletter over, Zoom or over FaceTime, and I'll just sort of use a screenshot of that to help promote and illustrate the interview. And invariably, when I've interviewed someone young, I mean, sort of an example that comes to mind is Clairo, sort of, young pop superstar. There'll be a bunch of comments on Instagram from her fans who have sort of not necessarily encountered the newsletter before, saying, "Where's the link to the video? Where's the link to the video? Where's the link to the video?" And like you said, Ben, there's no video. I transcribed that interview and sort of rendered it as a Q&A. The reason that I've sort of brought her up is because also, though, that interview was heavily about how deeply she said she and kind of friends of hers are into physical media, like old Soul 45s, old vinyl records, sort of analog technology. And she was sort of saying, like, there's this, I don't know exactly how old Clairo is, but if she has a memory of that stuff in her life, it's an extremely kind of like distant, like she was a toddler, or if that. But she's sort of interested. My God, there used to be analog technology. So I think that there is something intrinsic in the human relationship to that stuff that doesn't die, that kind of does live on. So maybe words will become the Soul 45s of 20 years from now.
Have you ever been tempted to to the physical product point, have you been tempted to try out you see this a lot with a lot of publications, obviously doing these kind of limited run, small release physical copies of things. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, because that's squarely within the wheelhouse of kind of our interests, and sort of like with the feel of the newsletter, like a zine. Absolutely, kind of like part and parcel of that. In fact, there's a show up in New York now. Our friend James Fuentes has a gallery down in Tribeca, and he has a show up of a painter whose stuff we really love, a landscape painter called John McAllister. And I wrote a kind of text for that show, which actually they printed as a zine. So technically, that's the first Blackbird Spyplane zine. It says John McAllister by Blackbird Spyplane on the cover. But to your point, that is something that we like to do. We like to sort of have physical memorabilia, or physical souvenirs sparingly. So we've sort of made some T-shirts and some caps, because sort of souvenirs and memorabilia are sort of part of the world of the newsletter. Also, I mean, sort of like a bunch. Every publishing house has sort of gotten in touch and said, "Is there a Blackbird Spyplane book?" And I think that would be cool too. I mean, we like physical things. One of the many contradictions in the newsletter is that it is this digital email thing that is so interested in actual kind of like physical creations and physically made things. But it takes so much time. My brain is only so powerful. So just like I'm sort of so in the kind of routine of putting out 2 of these a week that I need to kind of take a step back and figure out how to actually do. I mean, a zine is a lighter lift than a book, but it does feel like I don't know where I'd find the time to do it right.
I wanted to go back to something that you were talking about earlier, and I've kind of, as we were talking about your investigation into Essence, it reminded me of, we had Pablo Torre on the show recently, who is doing something really new and interesting in investigative journalism, where he's basically just dropping these big investigations on YouTube and as a podcast. He's not like, writing them down and printing them out. I was really struck a few years ago by your Essence story, and you dug into some of their practices. You recently had a story about J. Crew and whether they were using AI in some of their recent ad campaign work, which was super interesting. Are you, as you do those stories, are you like getting more tips from people? And I guess, how's that made you feel, doing some of that investigative work, and what's the reception been?
Oh yeah, to sort of answer the last part of that first, and this sort of ties back to, something that you guys were both asking about a little bit ago. I mean, what's sort of cool is that both those pieces, the Essence one and the J. Crew AI one, existed entirely as written through sort of the way, just written through text. There was no sort of infographic kind of infographic kind of version of it. There was no let me with my floating head and a little microphone pointing at like superimposed images behind me, sort of like TikTok version of it. It existed entirely in that format, and they both did really, really well. Two of the most, widely shared and widely read things we've ever published. So there's something heartening there, just to the question, about sort of pivots to video, et cetera. That format still found a really big audience. The content of those investigations still spread really far. So that's kind of heartening in that regard. As far as people hitting the signal, the encrypted tip line, not in any marked way. I would imagine that we now maybe sort of increasingly sort of exist in people's minds as a place to go with industry bombshells. I mean, there's no real bombshell in the Essence piece. I was just sort of like so many people, maybe you guys, I was just sort of like search for clothes often, specific garments that I wanted, and just see that they were on this site called Essence, and they were 70% off, sort of invariably. Essence, which again recently filed for bankruptcy protection, was really known for its like crazy markdowns. And so I just wanted to sort of like report that out. There's no real bombshell there, although some of the findings were kind of interesting. But yeah, the J. Crew one felt more of like an expose. The funny thing there was, it was AI generated images that had been sitting on their Instagram grid for 2 or 3 weeks before I even sort of caught wind that there might be something fishy about them and published anything about them. So they're sort of like sitting there in plain sight. In fact, some people in the comments had sort of noticed little telltale artifacts of AI, generative AI in those images. But yeah, who knows? I've gotten a couple texts, I suppose, over the years of, there was another funny one where Zara kind of recreated the atelier of the San Francisco designer, Evan Kenori. They sort of like did a weird facsimile of his store for their site. I don't know. I heard about that over a text, but yeah, I'm not exactly Woodward and Bernstein of the small clothes demi-monde quite yet. R.I.P. Robert Redford. R.I.P.
I still, you know what? I don't know. I feel like it's. I do feel like those were both kind of revelatory pieces. You shouldn't sell yourself short. But one thing that's interesting to me, you're a journalist, but you become well known yourself, better known yourself through the success of the newsletter, and clearly, a lot of you've done a lot of reporting on celebrities, both for the Times and for Blackbird Spyplane. How have you navigated kind of becoming more well known yourself, and how has it kind of changed the work that you do, or not?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really fascinating thing that my training as a magazine writer was really about, I'm not who people are interested in, especially because 99% of what I wrote was profiles. And if someone is picking up a profile that I've written, they're not there. My thinking was, they're not there to hear about me. They're here to hear about the much more interesting and well-known person who I'm interviewing. And there are profile writers who sort of would make themselves more of the main character. The opening scene is them picking up their rental car and how nervous they are about what the famous person they're on their way to meet is going to think about their choice of rental car. And that's the first 300. I hated approaches like that. I want to learn about, the subject of the profile, not the person writing it. That said, the sort of, that totally flips when you're in this moment of, I don't know, sort of broadly speaking, you sort of have to you have to put yourself front and center when you're asking people to sort of pay for your work, month in, month out. I think the expectation and the understanding is it really helps if you're front and center. There's pictures of you, especially in a newsletter about style. Sort of people want to see what you're wearing and things like that. But it is, totally a flip from my training as a magazine writer from 20 years. But it also taps back to something way earlier in my life, which was I was a theater kid, and I do have natural hamminess in me. And I grew up in New York, and there was this incredible, it's wild to think about. I don't think it still exists. There was a program that the Parks Department put out called Kids on Stage. And for $20, my parents gave the Parks Department a $20 check at the start of the summer. And I was babysat. They had childcare for the entire summer. It was like a camp run through the Parks Department where we'd put on a musical at the end of the summer. So you're talking to a Kids on Stage kid before anything else. So there is a hamminess that I'm happy to tap into.
I did not realize you were a thespian. What productions in the park were you in? What are we talking? Are we talking Les Mis? Are we talking like The Wizard of Oz? What were you in as a kid?
It was they were big Gilbert and Sullivan heads. So the Mikado was one year.
Oh wow.
And I was young, and I was in the back. I wasn't front and center. And then the summer after that was kind of a review with songs from like Cabaret and I don't know, some other shows I don't remember.
It strikes me also that the character, doing the voice of the kind of early years of the newsletter also seems like maybe a way to kind of like, feels maybe a little bit like a shield, right? Like, okay, there's an acknowledgement, I have to put myself into this, but I'm doing it slightly in character, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It was, yeah. And the other thing was that sort of, I think when you're going into, people talk a lot about the sort of the parasocial relationship of sort of podcasts, and the kind of the way that is constituted of the like very simple but powerful, phenomenological effect of voices in your ear. There's something not quite as intimate, but still intimate about sort of arriving in people's inboxes, I think. And sort of, I want it to be kind of like, I don't know, like a fun presence as opposed to a bummerish presence in people's inboxes. And that was part of it too. So it's like putting on a mask or like shifting kind of tracks in my brain a little bit. And also just sort of like putting on a show a little bit, especially also around clothes, which sort of often are sort of talked about in maybe pretentious or condescending terms. It's like the kind of like archetypal snotty, boutique clerk or something. This voice was very clearly not that.
At the risk of attempting to dispel your mystique, can you talk a little about the business of Blackbird Spyplane? Are you making money?
Yeah, no, it's incredible. The fact that $6 a month, we charged $5 a month for until very recently, and recently changed it to $6. Most people don't know that because if you're already paid, you're grandfathered in at $5. But that adds up very quickly. In absolute numbers, a small amount of people paying $5 each a month adds up, quicker than you might think.
So are you making more money than you were making as a magazine writer?
Oh, definitely. And again, that's not necessarily saying much. One of the, I don't know, I've heard Max talk about this, maybe like on the Tina Brown episode that you guys did, sort of feeling like you came in at the tail end of a kind of like, to use a Graydon Carterism, like when the going was good. I guess I was really, starting to write for magazines in my early 20s and the early 2000s. You could still conceive of like a lucrative career, relatively speaking. It wasn't a finance career, but a well-compensated career at that moment, and that's really collapsed. Anyway, that said, yes, I'm definitely making more than I ever did. And, Aaron, when we started this newsletter, was working as a talent scout for the industrial design team at Apple. And the newsletter and Concord got big enough that she was able to quit Apple a couple years ago. And she works on the newsletter now, essentially full time. So it's doing that well, which is amazing.
You don't want to tell us how much money it's bringing in, do you?
No, that would be a mystique exploder.
To ask a kind of behind the scenes question, this obviously you and Aaron are doing this together. How is it? How do you divide labor, and how has it changed your marriage?
Yeah. So the changing our marriage deepened it, made it more powerful, made our bond that much stronger. No, I don't know. She the division of labor, it's sort of it's messy in a way that sort of any collaborative effort is messy in the sense of there's sort of no clear line. I mean, I sort of take the lead on the sort of most of the newsletters that are sort of come out during the week as Blackbird Spyplane, but they're bylines. We sort of sign them off, both of us, because oftentimes she's finding the things that we're writing about. She's also sort of doing top edits on everything that goes out, so she's sort of reading stuff, and then that kind of flips when it's Concord, which is the newsletter that she sends out. I'm probably finding fewer things for her to write about. She's a really good reconnoiterer, but sort of doing top edits and things like that. I will say the kind of the one thing that we sort of do need to sort of like constantly work on, and again, this is sort of like, in microcosm, sort of what a lot of people feel these days, even who don't create something with a spouse or with a partner, but sort of like trying to set up boundaries between life and work as they sort of constantly erode. That's something that everyone sort of, our phones can buzz with a note from our boss at any time. Think about that when your kind of coworkers, literally the person you share your house with, and sort of we need to remember, like, kind of if I wake up first thing in the morning and I'm making coffee and Aaron walks into the kitchen and it's 7:30 a.m., maybe I should just sort of like take a note about what I want to tell her, as opposed to immediately saying, hey, I had this idea for Thursday. It's good to really sort of carve out some space that isn't just sort of talking about the newsletter. That said, it's really hard because it sort of has become all consuming, and kind of, I feel like Spyplane is kind of this background function that's just like always on in my brain. So when people say, how long do you spend on the newsletter? It's kind of like, it's sort of constant. And that's a function of it being so much, kind of like a reflection of my interest and stuff. But yeah, it's really hard to turn off.
I think that's a really great answer. And it gets at another weird theme that we keep coming back into in the show, which is like, we're really getting into people's personal relationships more than I thought we would for a media show. We did an interview with Christian Amanpour and Jamie Rubin, who was a former State Department, top diplomat, who are married and divorced and now have a podcast. It's very interesting to see how people navigate their media relationships and family relationships and those kind of combine. So you've been doing Blackbird Spyplane for 5 years. What do you think the next 5 years look like? / do you want to keep doing it for 5 years?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one thing that we've said from the start is we are sort of stubbornly anti-growth, stubbornly anti-scale. I mean, one of the things that we really kind of, like about this thing is that it sort of is more than sustaining. And so as long as that's the case, I don't know, there's this, I remember reading this Irina Alexander piece about Scott Sternberg, the guy who created this fashion line Band of Outsiders. And then what was his other clothing line called? He had a line of basics. Entire World. Yeah, and then there's a Times Magazine cover story that Irina wrote about him, and I just remember him talking about how both lines got kind of just sort of, I don't know why I went to this example, there's zillions of them, but both of those brands and lines got killed in his telling by investors putting in money and then wanting a certain kind of scale of return, and so all kinds of burdens were put on the business, whether it's opening stores or expansion, whatever it was. And he was like, we were making clothes that people liked and they were buying them. Why couldn't it have just stayed that? So we're making a newsletter that makes us happy to work on. that people are into. So we're in no rush to kind of invent other things to try and, pile on top of that. I mean, that said, there have been a couple opportunities to do things that are fun. We did a sort of collaborative hiking boot with this brand out of Montana that we like last year. We don't like to make a ton of junk. And like I said, we made t-shirts. Don't want to do a ton of that, but there are some fun things that can kind of arise that feel sort of a piece with the newsletter that can make some extra dough. But no, it's not like I can't wait to get this on. I don't know. Where did Hot Ones go? Like I have no expansion plan. I mean, I think what's very beautiful again about this moment is that you sort of like, you can take the sort of like the weirdness or the niche interests of kind of the blogspot era, but just with this kind of crowdfunding economic engine attached to it. And that can, like I said, like those numbers add up very quickly, and you kind of like, they can ride for a really long time. I think that's my hope. I'm still getting a kick out of it. I feel like also the newsletter can kind of just like, it's so much, while there is me putting on a kind of like persona to a degree, it's so much myself and my own interests, and Erin's self and her own interests, that it can kind of change with us and doesn't need to feel kind of constricting or anything. That's my hope.
Well, Jonah, thank you so much for doing this. It looks like Alex Soros, who did buy Hot Ones, will not be buying a Blackbird Spyplane. That's
I feel like Alex is a Mixed Signals listener.
Yeah.
Let us know what you think of this, Alex.
But what kind of pants wearer is he? That's
I think
really
he's
the question.
like actually
extremely skinny. No, extremely skinny. I saw the Huma Abedin pictures. Extremely thin. At the very least, he needs to read Jonah's New York Times piece. But Jonah, thanks again.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Did he say anything that surprised you as a real sort of power consumer of his newsletter?
It hasn't surprised me, but I really do think it's so interesting how specifically and intentionally kind of conceived the whole thing has been from start to finish. I think they really came in with very clear idea of what they wanted to do. They had a clear voice, which is slightly changed, as he acknowledged. But they didn't even dabble in the idea of like, oh, maybe we should bring somebody on who can like, copy edit us, or like, oh, what if we tried a podcast or anything else? The temptations that pretty much anybody else who's in the kind of creator, journalist, media space has kind of tried. They're just so obviously kind of against it, and they're against it both in the stuff that they actually put in the newsletter and in the kind of the media output. And I think that's just really, really interesting, and it's obviously very different, from what a lot of other people have done. But it's also, one of the successful kind of niche media models, that we've talked about a little bit on the show. The previous era of media was obviously about growth for the sake of achieving some sort of scale. And, there is real value in saying, I know my audience, this is really working. We have very little overhead. We're not trying to, necessarily make this into a multi-million-dollar or, tens of millions of dollar business. So let's just be happy with what we have.
Yeah, that was interesting. First of all, just sort of his disdain for the kind of big commercial, fundamentally corrupt fashion industry where people are being sold shoes, taking the picture and selling them without taking them out of the box. I mean, which right. I mean, he didn't say this, basically just a bribe to promote your product. But another thing that struck me was how little we talked about social media. I mean, I think what he is offering is kind of a reaction to and escape from the sort of mass scale social media of the 2000s and everything about it, from the smallness of the brands, the kind of bespokeness of the products, to his own very direct connection to the audience, just is like the opposite of being on Facebook in 2019.
Yeah, I think it's been clearly been really helpful for him to leave some money on the table in terms of the commerce or kind of affiliate links. Clearly it's worked. He's number 2 on the fashion charts on Substack, amid another sea of fashion newsletters, which are really aimed largely at, telling you what looks good and kind of selling you stuff. And clearly audiences are receptive to that, right? Like clearly they think that it's actually really nice and refreshing, to be recommended things that aren't for the purpose of enriching the author or the media company.
Yeah, it turns out trust and integrity, have some value. What's the last thing you bought from Blackbird Spyplane, Max?
I bought two things that were really interesting. I bought a big warm scarf from this British small label. I'm going to totally butcher the name, so I'm not even going to attempt it. And then also this kind of jacket. These were part of like a very limited sample sale for that they made kind of available to Blackbird Spyplane readers, and I jumped on it immediately. And the garments are super weird and cool. The jacket is definitely the weirdest thing that I own, and the scarf is just amazingly warm and cozy. I'll have to wear it soon.
We'll have to put those in the show notes, but no affiliate link. But
Absolutely.
But Max, thank you for bringing Jonah on. Like I've been sort of peripherally aware of him, and I think that was just a really fascinating success story, actually.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for letting me geek out once again. It's one of my favorite things to do on the show. Well, that is it for us this week. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Mixed Signals podcast from Semaphore. Our show is produced by Sheena Ozaki with special thanks to Josh Billinson, Chad Lewis, Rachel Oppenheim, Anna Pizzino, Garrett Wiley, Jules Zern, and Tori Kaur. Our engineer is Rick Kwan, and our theme music is by Billy Libby. Our public editor is Hamish McKenzie, without which Blackbird Spyplane would not exist, or would exist on Medium or something else.
And if you like Mixed Signals, please follow us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe.
And if you want more, you can always sign up for Semaphore's media newsletter out every Sunday night.